Okay, let's play some
there is
damn
no meat,
shit.
no milk, no wool for clothes. And remember, the fish had already died. Overnight, Egypt's economy collapsed. Without milk and meat. Overnight, Egypt's economy collapsed. Without horses, there is no functional army. Without oxen, there is no way to plough the land. Without sheep, there is no meat, no milk, no wool for clothes. And remember, the fish had already died in the first plague. All of Egypt's animal protein simply disappeared. And again, Exodus 9:4, the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and that of Egypt, so that no animal belonging to the Israelites will die. The animals of the Hebrews survived, all of them.
Come on,
if you believe that this level of supernatural protection can only come from God, comment, God is sovereign. Now imagine the scene, the Egyptian fields covered with animal carcasses, the smell, once again, the smell. Remember that we already have layers of accumulated stench, dead fish, dead frogs, and now thousands, perhaps millions of dead animals rotting under the sun. The landscape of Egypt had been transformed into something resembling the end of the world. And the survivors, the Egyptians who were still trying to maintain some normalcy, now faced a real food crisis. With no animals for slaughter, no fish, and crops damaged by the previous plagues, hunger began to knock at the door. But hunger was not yet the worst of it. Because the sixth plague brought something that no Egyptian could have predicted, and that transformed collective suffering into personal agony. Sixth plague, boils. Exodus 9:10-11 describes. They took soot from a furnace and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out among people and animals. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils that were on them and on all the Egyptians. The magician, the most spiritually powerful men in Egypt after the Pharaoh, could not even stand up. The Hebrew word used is shechem, the same word used to describe Joel's boils. They were open, festering sores, painful to the touch, covering the entire body. Imagine an entire nation, millions of people, with their skin covered in open ulcers. No one can work, no one can sleep. Fathers cannot carry their children in their arms because the contact hurts too much. Mothers cannot breastfeed because the skin of their breasts is raw. The simple act of putting on clothes is torture. And remember what came before. These people were already dehydrated, malnourished, exhausted, covered in insect bites, breathing air contaminated by the stench of decomposition. The boils did not fall on healthy bodies. They fell on bodies already devastated. The vulnerability was total. Secondary infections must have been common. Without antibiotics, without modern medicine, an infected ulcer could kill. It is very likely that the sixth plague was the first to cause mass deaths among the population long before the 10th plague. Think about what is happening from the point of view of an ordinary Egyptian at this moment. In a matter of weeks, perhaps a few months, your life went from the comfort of the most advanced civilization in the world to something worse than any war. Your river turned to blood. Your house was invaded by frogs that then died and rotted in your furniture. Insects sucked your blood and that of your children to the point of madness. Swarms destroyed any remnant of normalcy. Your animals, your wealth, your transport, your food, all died in a single day. And now your body is covered in sores that burn, fester and do not heal. You have lost everything, and Pharaoh still refuses to free the Hebrew slaves. But prepare yourself, because the 4 plagues that are still to come make all of this like a prelude. What God was about to do to the sky of Egypt defies anything nature has ever produced in that region. And what happened on the final night changed not only Egypt, but the entire history of humanity. 7th plague, hail. But not just any hail. Forget everything you have ever seen in storms. Exodus 9:23-24 describes something that had never happened in the recorded history of Egypt. The Lord sent thunder and hail, and lightning flashed down to the ground. So the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. Hail fell and lightning flashed back and forth. It was the worst storm in all the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. Fire mixed with hail. Reread that. Stones of ice falling from the sky with fire burning between them. Modern meteorologists debate what this could be. Constant lightning in the midst of an extreme hailstorm. Some atmospheric volcanic phenomenon. The biblical text does not bother to explain the physics. It bothers to record the effect. And the effect was devastating.
You stupid goddamn.
Exodus 9:25. Throughout Egypt, hail struck everything in the fields, both people and animals. It beat down everything growing in the fields and stripped every tree, every herb, every tree. Everything that was exposed outdoors was destroyed. Think of it as an aerial bombardment. No outdoor shelter could withstand it. People who could not run inside stone structures died. Exodus records that God, before sending the plague, gave a warning. This detail is extraordinary. He told Moses to warn that every man and animal out in the field without shelter.
I got one word of advice for you.
Verse 20.
Resign.
Those officials of Pharaoh who feared the word of the Lord hurried to bring their slaves and their livestock inside. Some Egyptians were already listening. They were already taking the God of Israel seriously. But verse 21 adds, but those who ignored the word of the Lord left their slaves and livestock in the field, and they died. Now, let's look at the agricultural impact, because here begins the final collapse of Egypt's ability to feed its population. Exodus 9:31-32 is surprisingly specific. The flax and barley were destroyed, since the barley was in ear and the flax was in bloom. The wheat and spelt, however, were not destroyed because they ripen later. This is agronomic information that allows us even to place the plague on the calendar, probably between January and February, when barley is ear in Egypt. And it allows us to understand the calculation of destruction. Barley was the basic grain for making bread and beer, the two most fundamental foods of the Egyptian diet. Flax was the fiber used to manufacture practically all the clothing in Egypt, all medical bandages, all ship sails, all the fabric used in mummification. To destroy flax and barley was not just to destroy a crop, it was to destroy the textile industry, food production, medical capacity, and naval infrastructure all at once. The wheat and spelt survived because they were not yet ripe. There was still one last hope. If Egypt could protect this late crop, it could at least avoid total starvation. Keep this information in mind. It is crucial for understanding the next plague. And here I need you to stop and notice the pattern. Each plague was not random. Each one dismantled a specific layer of Egyptian civilization. The water, the basis of survival. The animals, the basis of the economy, the skin, the physical integrity of bodies, the crops, the ability to feed the people. And each plague was also a direct attack on a specific Egyptian god. The Nile was Hapi, the frogs were Heket, the frog-headed goddess of fertility. The pestilence on animals attacked Hathor, the cow-headed goddess, and Apis, the sacred bull. The boils challenged Isis, the goddess of healing. The hail with fire was on the front to Nut, the sky goddess, and Seth, the god of storms. God was not just punishing Egypt. He was systematically proving that every Egyptian deity was powerless. He was judging not just a pharaoh, he was judging an entire pantheon. Exodus confirms this directly. I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt, and the pharaoh. At this point, his behavior follows a pattern that any psychologist would recognize. He yields in the moment of pain. I have sinned. The Lord is righteous, and goes back on it the instant the pressure relieves. Exodus 9:34-35. When Pharaoh saw that the rain and hail and thunder had stopped, he sinned again. He and his officials hardened their hearts. Each retreat was a sentence upon his own people. Each no meant another plague. and the next one was going to destroy the last hope of food that Egypt still had. Eighth plague. Locusts. Remember the wheat and spelt that survived the hail because they were not yet ripe? Those were exactly what the locusts came to devour. Exodus 10:14-15. Never before had there been such a plague of locusts, nor will there ever be again. They covered all the ground until it was black. The ground turned black. There were so many insects that they blocked the sunlight. Anyone who has ever witnessed a locust swarm, and they still occur in Africa and the Middle East today, describes the same phenomenon. The sky turns dark, the sound is deafening, and in a matter of hours, not a green leaf is left. Nothing. A modern swarm of desert locusts can contain 80 million individuals per square kilometer and consume in one day the equivalent of food for 35,000 people. Now imagine a swarm Exodus describes as the largest that has ever existed, covering the entire territory of Egypt. Verse 15. They devoured all that was left after the hail, everything growing in the fields and the fruit on the trees. Nothing green remained on a tree or plant in all the land of Egypt. Nothing green, not a leaf on any tree, not a plant in any field. Egypt, which weeks before was one of the most fertile lands of the ancient world, now looked like the surface of the moon, brown, dry, dead. I want you to mentally calculate what this means in terms of survival. The fish died in the first plague, the herds died in the fifth, the barley and flax were destroyed in the seventh, and now the wheat, the spelt, and all the remaining vegetation disappeared in the eighth. The entire food chain of Egypt was eliminated, all of it. A nation of millions of people now literally had no source of new food. What remained were the stocks in the granaries, and Egypt, being the power it was, likely had significant reserves. Royal granaries, temple storehouses, provincial warehouses. But these stocks had been planned to supplement production, not to replace it entirely. And with the transport animals dead, redistributing grain from central warehouses to remote populations was logistically almost impossible. The larger cities near the great granaries probably survived. But the rural villages, the more distant settlements, hunger must have already been a reality in those places, and at this point, something remarkable happened in the court. Pharaoh's servants, his advisors, his ministers, his officials, broke protocol and confronted Pharaoh directly. Exodus 10:7. Pharaoh's officials said to him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go, so that they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not yet realize that Egypt is ruined?" Notice the tone, it's not a request. It's almost an accusation. Do you not yet realize? They were saying to Pharaoh's face that he was responsible for the destruction. It was insubordination. At any other moment in Egyptian history, anyone who spoke to the Pharaoh like that would have been executed. But the situation was so desperate that the normal rules no longer applied. The social fabric was tearing. Pharaoh tried to negotiate. He said the men could go, but the women and children would stay. Moses refused, and Pharaoh drove Moses out of his presence. And the locusts came. After the locusts, God sent a west wind that carried every locust into the Red Sea. Not a locust was left anywhere in Egypt. But the damage was done. The fields were bare. And what came in the ninth plague was perhaps the most terrifying of all. Not because of physical pain, not because of material destruction, but because of the pure psychological terror it caused. Ninth plague. Darkness. Exodus 10:21-23. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward the sky so that darkness spreads over Egypt, darkness that can be felt. Darkness that can be felt. Darkness so dense you could physically feel it." It was not night. It was not an eclipse. It was not a sandstorm, although some naturalists have tried that explanation. The text is clear. For 3 days, no one could see anyone else. No one left their place.
God damn it.
Total, absolute, impenetrable darkness for 72 consecutive hours. Try to process what this does to the human mind. You are sitting in your house. You cannot see your own hand in front of your face. You cannot see your children, although you hear their breathing right there beside you. You cannot light a torch and hear the ancient rabbis debate. But many commentators suggest that the darkness was supernatural in nature and that no flame could penetrate it. You are trapped, blind, disoriented, with no sense of time, because there is no difference between day and night. The fear is absolute. Every sound in the dark is a threat you cannot identify. Every silence is even worse. And in Egypt, this plague had a theological dimension that went straight to the heart of Egyptian identity. The supreme god of the Egyptian pantheon was Ra, the sun god. Pharaoh was considered the son of Ra, the incarnation of Ra on earth. All the legitimacy of the throne came from the sun, and now the sun had disappeared. For 3 days, Ra was dead, defeated, silenced. If the previous plagues had challenged the lesser gods, this was a frontal attack on the main god. It was like saying to all of Egypt, your most powerful god cannot even light a candle before my power. Meanwhile, Exodus records the contrast. Yet all the Israelites had light in the places where they lived. In Goshen, it was day. Children played, families cooked, life went on. While all of Egypt lay paralyzed in the deepest darkness it had ever experienced, the Hebrews lived in broad daylight. The message was impossible to ignore, even for the most obstinate observer. When the darkness finally dissipated, Pharaoh called Moses one last time, and he made a final offer. Exodus 10:24. Go, worship the Lord. Even your women and children may go with you. Only leave your flocks and herds behind. Moses refused. Not a hoof is to be left behind. And Pharaoh lost control. Exodus 10:28. Pharaoh said to Moses, get out of my sight. Make sure you do not appear before me again. The day you see my face, you will die. And Moses replied, just as you say, I will never appear before you again. And it was Pharaoh who signed the death sentence of his own children, because the 10th plague, the last, the definitive one, the one that changed everything, had already been decreed. And this time, there was no negotiation. There was no warning Pharaoh to harden his heart and then retreat. The cycle was over. God said to Moses in Exodus 11:4-5, about midnight I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, to the firstborn son of the female slave, who is at her handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle as well. Every firstborn is at her handmill, and all the to the firstborn son of the female slave, who is at her handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle as well. Every firstborn, from the palace to the slave quarters, from the throne to the mill. It did not matter if you were rich or poor, noble or slave, powerful or insignificant. If you were the first son, you would die that night. Exodus 11:6 adds, there will be loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than there has ever been or ever will be again. But before that night arrived, God gave instructions to the Hebrews that defined the most important ritual in the history of Israel, and that echo to this day, more than 3,000 years later. Each family was to take a lamb without defect, a year-old male. They were to keep it for 4 days. Imagine living with the animal, feeding it, seeing it as a living creature, and then, on the 14th day of the month, slaughter it at twilight. Take the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the house. And that night, when the destroyer passed through Egypt, he would see the blood and pass over. Hence the name, Pesach, Passover. The Lord passed over. The meal had specific instructions. Roast the lamb whole, not boiled in water, roasted over the fire. Eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Eat it standing up, with your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand, in haste, like someone who is about to flee, because that was exactly what they were about to do. And then midnight came. Exodus 12:29-30. At midnight the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. There was not a house without someone dead. Read that again. Every Egyptian house had at least one death that night. In a nation of millions, every family lost someone, the eldest son, the heir, the father's pride. Pharaoh's own firstborn died. The boy who was the future of the throne, the next living god of Egypt, died like any other. Imagine the sound of that night. It was not crying. It was a collective howl of millions of people discovering all at once that their children were dead. The text says loud wailing. The Hebrew uses se'aka gadola, a cry of agony so deep that the same word is used to describe the cry of the Hebrews under slavery. The cry that rose from Egypt that night must have been audible miles away. And it was at that moment, on that night, at that hour, with the body of his own son still warm, that Pharaoh finally broke. Exodus 12:31-32. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds, as you have said, and go, and also bless me." That last detail is devastating, and also bless me. The man who said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him?" now begged for the blessing of the God he refused to recognize. It was no longer arrogance. It was a broken father, holding his son's body, begging for mercy from the God. Now begged for the blessing of the God he refused to recognize. It was no longer arrogance. It was a broken father, holding his son's body, begging for mercy from the God he challenged 10 times. And the Egyptians, Exodus 12:33, the Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, we will all die. They did not just allow the Hebrews to leave, they pushed them out. With urgency, with desperation, fearing that if they stayed one more day, the next plague would annihilate them completely. And verses 35-36, the Hebrews asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing, and the Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and they gave them what they asked for. The Egyptians handed over their wealth voluntarily, everything, anything. Take what you want, but just go. After generations of slavery, the Hebrews left Egypt loaded with gold, and Egypt was left behind, on its knees, burying its children. And now I need you to visualize what happened in the following hours, because the Exodus itself, the physical act of leaving Egypt, was a logistical event of almost unimaginable proportions. Exodus says they set out from Ramesses towards Sukkoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. 600,000 adult men. If you add women, children, and the elderly, estimates range between 2 and 3 million people. Even if the numbers are interpreted more conservatively, and there is legitimate academic debate about the translation of the Hebrew word Eleph, which can mean thousand or clan. We are talking, at the very least, about tens of thousands of people setting in motion at the same time, at night, in the dark, with children in their arms, flocks by their side, bags of unleavened dough on their backs. Exodus details this moment with almost cinematic domestic precision. The people took their dough before the yeast was added, and carried it on their shoulders in kneading troughs wrapped in clothing. They left so fast that the bread did not have time to rise. The raw dough was wrapped in the wooden troughs themselves, tied in cloth, thrown on their backs, and they ran. That is where unleavened bread matzah, which Jews eat at Passover to this day, comes from. It's not an abstract symbol. It's the physical memory of a flight so urgent there was no time to wait for the dough to ferment. And along with the Hebrews, a crowd went out that is often ignored in traditional narratives. Exodus 12:38. Many other people went up with them. The Hebrew uses Erev Rav, a great mixture. They were Egyptians, slaves of other nationalities, Semitic peoples living in the Delta, people who saw the plagues, who saw the power of the God of Israel, and who decided on that night of terror that it was better to follow the Hebrews than to stay in Egypt. The Exodus was not just an ethnic liberation. It was a civilizational rupture. People of multiple origins, abandoning a collapsing empire to follow a God who had just proven 10 consecutive times that he was more powerful than any other force in the known world. Think of the road that night. A human column stretching for miles. The crying of babies, the lowing of oxen, the clinking of Egyptian gold and silver inside the bags. Torches illuminating exhausted but determined faces. Behind them, the distant sound of Egypt in mourning, that collective cry that did not cease. And in front of them, the desert. No one knew exactly where they were going. Moses knew the general direction. Canaan, the promised land, but the route, the logistics, what to eat when supplies ran out, how to provide water to millions of people in the Sinai desert. None of that was resolved. They were marching on pure faith, following an 80-year-old man who had spoken to God in a bush 40 years earlier. And God guided them in a way that the text describes as visible, tangible, impossible to ignore. Exodus 13:21. By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. A pillar of cloud during the day, a pillar of fire during the night, visible to everyone. It was not blind faith, it was following a supernatural manifestation hovering on the horizon, moving when they should move, stopping when they should stop. The text adds something that reveals the intensity of that march by day or night. They did not stop to rest. They did not set up camp on the first night. They kept marching day and night because they all knew instinctively that Pharaoh could change his mind. He had already done it 9 times before. Why would he not do it again? And they were right. It is impressive how the biblical text does not try to soften what happened next. It does not turn Pharaoh into a cartoonish villain or a tragic hero. It just records the facts with an almost cold honesty. Exodus 14:5. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." Notice, it was not just Pharaoh, it was the officials too. The same officials who, day before, confronted Pharaoh and said, "Do you not yet realize that Egypt is ruined?" Now said, "Why did we let them go?" The pain of the firstborn was still fresh.